Sundar Pichai's humble words made Narendra Modi call it true leadership. The hall was silent, filled with people from many walks of life. Cameras stood ready, flashes waiting for a single moment to break the calm. Sundar Pichai walked slowly to the stage, his steps measured, his face calm but full of thought. People expected a great speech about technology, about power, about wealth. But when Sundar reached the microphone, he paused for a long moment. He looked at the audience, then gently smiled. His first words were simple. He did not speak about himself. He did not talk about Google, about his success, or about how far he had come. Instead, he spoke about something everyone in the room could feel. He said, "True leadership is not about the position you hold, but about the humility you show when no one is watching." Those words fell softly, yet they carried weight heavier than iron. The audience shifted in their seats, and a quiet wave of respect moved through the room. In that very first minute, Narendra Modi leaned forward. His eyes narrowed, not in judgment, but in deep thought. He had heard countless speeches in his life. He had seen leaders rise and fall. But Sundar's choice of words was different. There was no pride, no arrogance. There was only honesty. As Sundar continued, he spoke about his father. He described a man who worked with little, but gave everything he could for his family. Sundar remembered the old scooter his father used to ride through the busy streets, carrying him to school even in heavy rains. He remembered how his father taught him to be patient when they could not afford certain things. His father never shouted, never complained, and never made Sundar feel small. Instead, he taught him that strength was not loud. Strength was quiet, steady, and kind. The audience leaned in as Sundar's voice softened. He said, "My father never owned much, but he owned respect. Not respect from power or fear, but respect from the kindness he gave. He showed me that being humble does not make you weak. It makes you unforgettable." Narendra Modi's hand moved to his chin. He thought of his own early days, of his struggles, of the times when people doubted him. He remembered selling tea, standing in heat and dust, speaking to people who did not see his future. He felt a strange connection. Sundar's father, though unknown to him, suddenly felt like a reflection of his own past. The hall remained still, and Sundar's words grew deeper. He explained how his father's small lessons guided him even when he stood in rooms full of world leaders. He said, "In rooms of power, I hear my father's voice reminding me to listen first, to never let success silence humility." This was not the speech people had expected. They thought Sundar would speak about the future of technology, about innovation, about numbers and profit. Instead, he was weaving a story of humanity. Each line was like a thread, tying the hearts of the people together. Suddenly, Sundar shared something personal. He said there were moments when he almost gave up, times when he felt invisible, when rejection hurt him deeply. But he always remembered his father telling him, "If you cannot change the world around you, change the way you carry yourself. The world will notice one day." The audience could feel the tension, the struggle behind those words. Some nodded quietly. Some lowered their eyes, remembering their own battles. Sundar was not just talking about himself. He was talking about everyone. Narendra Modi finally smiled. It was not the smile of a politician. It was the smile of a man who had found truth in another man's words. Later, when people would ask him what he thought, he would simply say, "This is true leadership." The moment was not about power. It was about respect. It was about humility, shining brighter than titles or wealth. As Sundar's words settled in the room, one thing was clear. People were not just listening. They were feeling. They were holding on to every sentence, every pause, every quiet truth. Sundar had turned a simple speech into a mirror. In that mirror, Everyone saw a piece of themselves. The silence after Sundar finished his first story did not feel empty. It felt alive, like the air itself was carrying the weight of his words. People did not clap right away. They just sat there, absorbing the truth that had been placed before them. It was a rare kind of silence, one that came not from emptiness, but from respect. Then, softly, Sundar spoke again. He said, "I was not born with confidence. I was not the brightest student in my class. I was shy, often afraid to raise my hand. I thought if I spoke, people would laugh. But my father always told me, silence can be powerful, but only if you use it to listen. When you are ready to speak, speak with honesty, and people will listen." His voice cracked just slightly at the memory, and that small crack made him human, not distant. The audience leaned in closer. Many had felt the same fear, the same doubt, and they now waited to see how Sundar had turned weakness into strength. He continued, "In college, I failed at many things. I applied for scholarships I never got. I tried for programs that rejected me. But every time I failed, my father would say, 'Failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is the teacher that success respects.'" Narendra Modi's face grew thoughtful. He knew those words well, though they were spoken in a different way in his own life. He had lived through rejection, too, times when he had been told he would never rise. He could feel the honesty in Sundar's voice, and it stirred something deep inside him. The room listened as Sundar shared how small opportunities shaped him. He spoke about the first time he saw a computer in India, how rare and unreachable it felt. He described how he and his classmates would gather around one machine, waiting for their turn, often with only a few minutes to explore. "I still remember," Sundar said quietly, "the day I typed something and the machine responded. It felt like the universe was answering me. In that moment, I knew this was not just about technology. It was about possibility. It was about hope." People in the audience began to smile. They could see the young boy he once was, full of wonder, standing in front of an old computer, believing in something bigger than himself. But Sundar did not let the story end in joy alone. He told them about how hard it was to convince others to believe in his dream. He told them about nights when he stayed awake, studying while his friends went out to celebrate. He shared how people laughed when he said he wanted to study abroad, how they called him unrealistic. "I kept those words inside me," Sundar admitted. "Sometimes they burned. Sometimes they made me want to quit. But then I would hear my father's gentle voice. He never said I had to prove anyone wrong. He only said, 'Prove yourself right. That is enough.'" Narendra Modi slowly nodded. He recognized that kind of strength, the quiet strength that grows from within, not from fighting others, but from believing in yourself. The hall grew heavier with emotion as Sundar described the day he left India. He carried only a suitcase, a few clothes, and his father's words. He remembered his mother's tears at the station, his father's hand resting firmly on his shoulder, telling him, "Be kind, even when you are strong. And remember, the world may give you titles, but your character will always be your only crown." As Sundar spoke those lines, many in the audience wiped their eyes. These were not just memories. These were lessons that every son, every daughter, every parent could understand. Narendra Modi's gaze softened. He looked not at the successful CEO, but at the boy behind the man, the boy who carried his father's voice through storms. Modi whispered something to himself, words no one else could hear, but the look on his face was clear. It was the look of respect. Sundar paused, then looked directly at the audience. His voice steady now, he said, "Many of you may feel small right now. You may feel unseen, unheard, unimportant. I have been there. But listen to me. The world does not decide your value, your kindness, your humility, your resilience. These decide who you are. Never forget that." The hall erupted in silence again. Not even the sound of shifting chairs, not even a cough. It was as though everyone knew they were being told something they would carry for the rest of their lives. And it was in this silence that Narendra Modi finally smiled again. A deep, warm smile, the kind that comes when truth touches the heart. He turned to the person beside him and said softly, "This is true leadership. Not power, not pride, but humility." The hall was still heavy with Sundar's words, but in that weight there was light. People could feel something shifting inside them. Sundar looked across the audience and knew that this was not the moment to speak about achievements or awards. This was the moment to touch the part of every person that often stays hidden. The part that doubts, the part that fears, the part that quietly hopes. He began with a question, soft yet sharp. "How many of you," he asked, "have ever felt invisible?" A few people nodded, others lowered their eyes. The truth of the question reached everyone. Sundar continued, "I know that feeling well. I have felt invisible in classrooms, in meetings, even in life itself. But invisibility can become strength if you let it teach you patience, and the courage to keep going." His words were not rushed. They fell slowly, like raindrops, each one landing with meaning. Sundar then told a story from his early days at Google. He said, "When I first joined, I was quiet. Many people did not even notice me. In meetings, I sat at the back. I did not speak much. I listened, I watched, and I waited. There were moments when I wondered if I would ever be heard. But then one day, I spoke up. I said something small, but it was honest. And for the first time, people listened. It taught me this. When you speak with truth, even the smallest voice can echo in the largest room." The audience leaned closer. It was not a story about sudden success. It was a story about waiting, about growing quietly until the right moment came. Narendra Modi listened intently. He thought of his own journey, of the long years when his voice carried only to small groups, when crowds were few, when attention was scarce. He knew what it meant to feel invisible, to feel small, and he also knew what it meant to rise through that silence. Sundar's tone grew softer, more personal. "There was a night," he said, "when I felt so defeated I wanted to return home. I had failed an important task. I felt I did not belong. I called my father, expecting him to be disappointed, but he simply said, 'Son, you are not failing, you are learning. Do not confuse the two.' Those words kept me standing when my heart wanted to fall." A deep sigh moved through the hall. People were not just listening. They were remembering their own moments of failure, their own nights of doubt. Sundar's story was stitching their hidden scars together with hope. Then he shared something unexpected. "I learned one of my greatest lessons not in a meeting room but in a cafeteria," he said. "There was a man who cleaned the tables. Most people walked past him. They did not even notice him. But one day I stopped and thanked him. He looked at me with surprise, then smiled. That smile reminded me that respect is not a gift for the powerful. Respect is a right for everyone. True leadership is not about how many people follow you. It is about how many people you lift up." Narendra Modi's eyes lit up at those words. He knew that kind of truth. Leadership without respect was only an illusion. The audience now felt the shift in Sundar's message. It was no longer only about him and his father. It was about them, about everyone who had ever been unseen, unheard, or underestimated. Sundar was reminding them that humility could transform weakness into power, and kindness could turn invisibility into influence. Then Sundar paused. His silence was deliberate. He let the message breathe before he spoke again. "My father told me," he said slowly, "that success without humility is like a tree without roots. It may look tall, but the first storm will bring it down. Humility is what holds you steady. The hall was quiet again, but this time it was not silence of heaviness. It was silence of reflection. Each listener was carrying those words into their own lives, planting them like seeds. Narendra Modi sat back, his hands folded. He had heard speeches from presidents, from world leaders, from business giants. But what he was hearing now was different. This was not about power. This was about humanity. And it was reminding him of something he had always believed, that the true strength of India lay not in wealth or weapons, but in the humility and resilience of its people. When Sundar finished, the audience did not erupt in applause right away. Instead, they held on to the quiet. It was only after a long pause that the clapping began, soft at first, then louder, until the hall was filled with a thunder that came not from noise, but from respect. The applause slowly faded, but the energy in the hall did not die. It lingered, deep and steady, like the warmth of a fire after the flames have calmed. Sundar stood quietly for a moment, letting the people breathe with him. Then he began again, his voice calm, carrying the same weight it had carried from the start. "People often ask me," Sundar said softly, "what is the secret of leadership?" They expect me to say intelligence, hard work, or vision. All of these are important, but they are not the heart of leadership. The heart of leadership is humility. Humility makes you listen when others only want to speak. Humility makes you accept mistakes when others only want to blame. Humility makes you remember where you came from, even when the world praises where you are. The audience nodded, some slowly, some with intensity. They knew he was speaking not as a man at the top, but as someone who had walked through shadows. He leaned forward just slightly and shared another story. "When I first started leading teams, I thought leadership meant giving answers. I thought it meant being the smartest person in the room, but I was wrong. One day, I faced a problem I could not solve. I sat silent in front of my team, unsure of what to say. Then, one of the youngest engineers, who had only joined weeks ago, spoke up with an idea. It was brilliant. In that moment, I understood. Leadership is not about always having the answer. It is about creating space where answers can be found." The hall grew quiet again, but this silence was alive with agreement. Many in the audience knew how it felt to be ignored, to be unseen in rooms where power sat at the table. Sundar's words gave them hope that even the smallest voice could matter. Narendra Modi listened carefully. He was reminded of his own early days in leadership, when he too had learned that leading people was not about commanding them, but about serving them. He thought of the many times he had bent down to listen to a villager's complaint, to hear a worker's struggle, to share tea with strangers. Those moments had shaped him, just as Sundar's humility shaped his path. Sundar's eyes softened as he recalled his father once more. "My father used to say, 'You do not need to stand on a stage to be a leader. You can lead by helping your neighbor, by showing patience, by being kind when others are not. If one person's heart changes because of you, that is leadership.' I did not understand it then, but I understand it now." The words seemed to sink into every corner of the room. People were not just hearing a speech anymore, they were being given a guide to live by. Then Sundar shifted the tone. He shared a moment of conflict, a time when humility was tested. "There was a meeting once," he said slowly, "with some of the most powerful people in technology. Voices were loud, tempers were high. I felt the urge to raise my voice too, to prove my strength. But I remembered my father's lesson. Instead of speaking louder, I chose to listen deeper. When I finally spoke, I did not speak with anger. I spoke with calm. To my surprise, the room grew quiet. Anger bowed to patience. In that moment, I saw the power of humility once again." A few people in the audience closed their eyes, holding onto the picture Sundar painted. They had all faced moments where pride wanted to win, where shouting felt easier than listening. Sundar's story reminded them that true strength is not in noise, but in restraint. Narendra Modi smiled again, this time with quiet admiration. He leaned to the person beside him and whispered, "This is what India must remember, that humility is not weakness. It is our greatest strength." The audience felt as if they were being carried through a journey, not of success, but of the lessons behind success. Sundar was not standing on the stage to shine. He was standing there to remind everyone that they, too, carried the same potential. Sundar then gave one final message for that part of his speech. "When you rise," he said, "never forget those who gave you their shoulders to stand on. Never forget the kindness that carried you when you thought you could not go further. True leadership is not measured by how high you climb, but by how many people rise with you." And with those words, the hall filled again with a deep silence. It was the kind of silence where people knew they had heard something they would never forget. The audience sat with their hearts heavy yet lifted, caught between reflection and hope. Sundar stood quietly for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle into the silence. Then he spoke again, his voice calm, steady, and filled with meaning. "I want to tell you something many people don't know," he began. "Leadership is not tested when life is easy. Leadership is tested when everything feels like it is breaking apart." He paused, and the hall leaned in, waiting. Sundar's face carried the memory of something difficult. "Years ago," he said slowly, "I was given a project that seemed impossible. We were expected to create something new, something that could change the way people lived. The pressure was heavy, the deadlines were close. The criticism was constant. There were days when I thought we would fail. There were nights when I doubted myself completely. I could hear voices around me telling me that maybe I wasn't ready, maybe I wasn't strong enough. Those words cut deep." The audience shifted uncomfortably because they too had felt that weight before. "But in those moments," Sundar continued, "I remembered my father's lessons. He used to say, 'Son, storms do not come to destroy you. They come to test your roots.' I held on to that. I told myself, if my roots were humility, if my roots were kindness, then no storm could pull me out of the ground." The hall went still again, and Narendra Modi's eyes softened with respect. He knew too well what it meant to face storms, to feel surrounded by doubt, and yet to keep standing with faith. Sundar described how the project continued, how the failures stacked up, and how the pressure nearly broke him. But then he told of the turning point. "One night," he said, "I was walking home late, tired, feeling defeated, and I saw a worker sweeping the street. It was dark, the night was cold, and no one was watching him. Yet he swept with care, with quiet pride. That moment struck me. He reminded me that true work is not about being seen. It is about being true to what you do, no matter who notices." I went back the next day with a new spirit. I told my team, "We are not working for praise. We are working because this matters." And slowly, step by step, we began to succeed. People in the audience exhaled deeply, as though a burden had lifted from them. Sundar was showing them that even the hardest struggles could be faced with humility and purpose. Narendra Modi, listening closely, smiled gently. He whispered to himself, "This is why humility is the greatest strength. It carries you when pride cannot." Sundar's words grew more emotional as he explained the lesson further. Leadership is not about standing tall when everything is perfect. Leadership is about standing steady when everything is broken. People do not follow titles. People follow character. They follow resilience. They follow kindness. The audience nodded, some with tears forming in their eyes. These were not empty words. They were reminders of battles they too had fought in their own lives. Then Sundar added a story that touched everyone even more deeply. During that difficult project, a junior engineer came to me. He was afraid of making mistakes. He told me he was not smart enough, not skilled enough. I looked at him and remembered my own fears when I was young. I told him what my father told me. Do not fear mistakes. Fear giving up. That young man stayed. His ideas became some of the strongest parts of our success, and today he leads his own team. The audience's silence was not empty. It was full of feeling. They could see the power of one gentle word, one moment of encouragement, one act of humility that could change lives. Narendra Modi's gaze grew thoughtful, and he leaned forward slightly. He could see in Sundar's words the same thread that ran through his own journey, lifting others up, carrying respect, turning weakness into strength. He felt a deep sense of pride that such values were being shown to the world. Sundar closed this part of his speech with one final thought. If you want to know true leadership, do not look at the person on the stage. Look at the people around them. If they are stronger, if they are kinder, if they are more hopeful because of that person, then you have found a true leader. The hall grew heavy with silence again. But in that silence, there was fire. People were holding those words close, not just as listeners, but as people who had been given a call to live differently. The hall was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet filled with thought. Every word Sundar had spoken so far stayed heavy in the air, as though no one wanted to let go of it. Sundar stood calmly, his eyes soft, his hands folded loosely in front of him. When he spoke again, his voice carried the same honesty that had held the audience from the beginning. People often believe, Sundar began, that leadership is about being unshaken. But I want to tell you something different. Leadership is not about never breaking. Leadership is about breaking and then finding the strength to rise again. The audience stilled even more. Some people leaned forward in their seats. Narendra Modi sat with his chin resting on his hand, deeply focused. He had lived this truth, and now he was hearing it in someone else's words. Sundar told a story from one of the darkest moments in his journey. There was a time, he said, when one of my projects failed completely. People called it a waste of resources. My team was disheartened. The media questioned whether I deserved my place. I felt as if the ground had fallen from under me. I remember going home and sitting alone in my room wondering if I should step down, if maybe the world was right. The audience held its breath. The image of a global leader like Sundar Pichai sitting alone in doubt was not only powerful, it was human. But then, Sundar continued softly, I remembered my father's words. He once told me, "Son, a broken branch can still grow leaves if it is patient. You are not finished just because you are hurt. You are only finished if you stop growing." Those words kept me alive that night. I told myself, this failure is not the end. It is a pause. I went back, faced the criticism, and told my team, we will start again. We will build better. And we did. The hall felt heavy with emotion. People thought of their own failures, their own nights of brokenness. Sundar's story gave them courage that even after falling, they too could rise. Narendra Modi's expression softened. He knew the sharp taste of failure, the pain of being questioned, the loneliness of carrying responsibility. He felt a quiet respect in his heart, not just for Sundar's success, but for the strength it took to carry humility through failure. Sundar then shared something even more unexpected. When I was at my lowest point, it was not a powerful person who reminded me of my worth. It was a colleague, someone without a high position, someone who rarely spoke. She walked up to me and said, "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. Please do not stop leading us now." Her words carried me more than any award or title ever could. It reminded me that leadership is not about being strong alone. It is about being strong together. The audience sat in silence, their eyes reflecting both pain and hope. They could feel how one sentence of kindness could change the direction of a life. Sundar's voice grew firmer now. Humility is not weakness. Humility is strength that does not need to shout. It is strength that chooses patience when anger is easier. It is strength that lifts others even when you yourself are tired. That is the leadership we must all learn. Narendra Modi's lips curved into a smile. He whispered again, "True leadership," as if confirming to himself what he had always believed. The energy in the hall began to change. People no longer looked at Sundar as just a CEO. They looked at him as a mirror of their own lives, someone who had walked through shadows and still carried light. Sundar then shared one last story for the evening. Once, I was asked what the most important lesson in leadership is. I thought of many answers: discipline, strategy, knowledge. But then I remembered my father's quiet voice and the countless small acts of kindness I had seen in my journey. I realized the greatest lesson is this: respect every person, no matter their role, no matter their status. Because respect builds trust, and trust is the foundation of all true leadership. The hall went silent one last time. People were not just listening, they were changing. The evening had grown long, yet no one in the hall seemed restless. Sundar's words had wrapped themselves around every listener, holding them still, holding them quiet. His stories had moved through failures and triumphs, through moments of doubt and courage, through the steady voice of his father and the gentle strength of humility. People did not just see a global leader in front of them anymore. They saw a man who had walked the same human path they had walked, who had felt the same pain and who carried the same small hopes in his heart. Sundar looked around the room, and then he spoke again, his voice softer now, carrying a calm weight. "When people ask me about leadership," he said, "I do not think of boardrooms or speeches. I think of my father riding an old scooter in the rain to take me to school. I think of my mother's quiet prayers when I left home. I think of the kindness of strangers who gave me a chance. Leadership is not about being above others. Leadership is about remembering those moments and carrying them with humility." The hall grew heavier with emotion. People had tears in their eyes. Some thought of their parents, some thought of their children, and some thought of the sacrifices in their own lives that no one had ever noticed. Sundar paused, letting the silence breathe. Then he continued, "I stand here not because I was the most talented, not because I was the most confident, but because I had people who taught me respect, who showed me patience, who reminded me of kindness. If I can give you one message tonight, it is this: true leadership is not about what you take from the world. True leadership is about what you give back." The audience sat frozen, as though afraid to miss a single word. Narendra Modi's eyes glistened with respect. He slowly rose from his seat. The hall turned its attention to him, for everyone knew this was not a planned moment. He looked at Sundar with a steady gaze, then spoke in a voice that carried across the room. "Today," Modi said, "we have not only heard a speech, we have seen an example of what India's strength truly is. It is not in power, not in wealth, not in pride. It is in humility. It is in the ability to rise without arrogance, to succeed without forgetting kindness, and to lead without forgetting where you came from. Sundar's words are not only wise, they are true leadership." The audience rose to their feet, not in noisy celebration, but in a standing respect. The applause was deep, steady, and full of heart. Sundar bowed his head slightly, not in pride, but in gratitude. In that hall, something had changed. People did not only admire Sundar Pichai, they carried his lessons with them. They carried the voice of humility, the reminder of resilience, and the courage to be kind even when the world was not. Narendra Modi stepped closer to Sundar and shook his hand firmly. He whispered so only Sundar could hear, "Your father would be proud. India is proud too." Sundar smiled softly. "Thank you," he replied. "But the pride belongs not to me. It belongs to every person who believes that humility is strength." And with that, the hall knew the story was complete. Sundar had not just given a speech. He had given a gift of words that would live on in the hearts of those who had listened.